Hello and welcome to the 19th installment of Kalam Digest, Kalam Podcast's weekly news summary. Kalam, as you all know, is the Bedouin behind the curtain of Middle Eastern podcasts, and I'd like to welcome my fellow Bedouins behind the curtains, Samuel calls Samra and Nouraddin Faris. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi.
Thank you. I obviously need to get a more Arab name. You can't even pronounce it anymore because you're so. But
Maybe we'll just call you the Bedouin behind the curtain, and that has to be it.
Sammy behind the curtain. Okay, guys, so today we're going to talk about a few different things, but the first sort of topic on the docket, obviously, is that international flights have resumed for the first time in 13 years to Syria, meaning more people are able to return home. The prospects are still looking promising. You know, the situation is sort of stabilizing. I saw a quite moving clip on social media of a group of Syrians on I think it was the first sort of international commercial flight to Damascus, singing the one of the revolutionary anthems, "Irfa rasak fog, enta Suri," and that was quite touching.
Raise your hat, you are a free Syrian, these passengers chant on the first international commercial flight to Damascus since the fall of the Assad regime. Many of them were barred from returning to Syria by the Assad regime. Some have not seen their family members for more than a decade.
What do you think of this? This is a good thing, right?
Well, I do believe that we touched on this topic during our Manadama recently, and we had somewhat of different views about it. People returning back to Syria, but I do feel, unfortunately, that I've changed my stance, and now I do understand your point. Let me just recap that I was feeling like people that have taken themselves abroad and are living somewhere safe should wait a little bit to see the political development before heading back home. Whilst both you, Edgar, and Sam, you both thought that Syrians perhaps want to be part of the change and want to influence what's happening. And I did think about it over Christmas and New Year's holiday, and I think I agree with you. So it is very hopeful.
Wow, it takes it takes a big person to change one's views, which say from many of the people involved in the polemics surrounding Syria, but that's a different discussion.
let's go to the next one, Adam. 100% tanky topic.
Exactly.
Today, let's talk more about Syria, I think.
Yeah,
Syria.
Sam, could you tell us, there are still some like mopping up operations? Mopping up, you said in your notes, against Assad loyalists in Homs and the western parts of the country. What are these like sort of military operations? What do they look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know exactly what's happening in every single village and city, etc. And of course, what we're seeing now, as we just talked about, is people returning to Syria to be part of the transition. And so far, it seems no external actor, except for, of course, Israel has been trying to kind of destabilize the country per se. But what's been going on the ground is some fighting between what seems to be Assad loyalists, the Ba'ath Party loyalists, around Homs and perhaps Hama, and towards the western part around Latakia on the coast, which is, as we all know, the areas of the country where there's a strong, high number of Alawi people living. But it seems to be, as far as I can tell, we as we talked about many times concerning Israel, we still don't know if perhaps the government is, the new regime is hiding aspects of what's going on. But it seems improbable, given how still confused the situation is, that it would be able to kind of censor effectively major kind of pogroms or something like that. So what we have seen is some fighting between what seems to be loyalist forces and forces of the until very recently opposition, trying to form themselves into some kind of coherent fighting army of the new Syrian regime. People have been arrested. There's been some deaths, but it seems pretty minor especially compared to what's been going on in Syria for the last 13 years, of course. And I've also tried to find any reports on pogroms or revenge attacks on minorities. Understood to have been supportive of Assad, Christians or Alawis. There's reports on, of course, some violence, but it seems very surprisingly minor. As our comrade Yassine said on the podcast episode a a week ago, everyone was expecting it to be major. Even in the best case scenario, people were expecting there to be major clashes between ethnic groups if the regime ever fell. But it seems to be surprisingly small number of such occurrences.
Yeah. The one thing that I've seen that and I've seen conflicting reports about this thing. I don't know too much about it. But apparently in the forces that took Damascus first, they weren't HTS. They were other rebel groups that came from the south, from Daraa. And they were the first sort of rebel groups that took Damascus, and then they coordinated with HTS, and there wasn't much of a clash or anything like that. But I have been seeing some people posting on social media, not too many news articles about it yet, but apparently there's this guy called Ahmed al-Awda, who is a leader of a rebel faction in southern Syria and Daraa, and sometime during the war he made a deal with Iran and Russia and the government, the Assads, and they kind of had this kind of like stalemate or something, where he could maintain his forces and his power in some parts of the south, and they had like kind of like a some form of agreement with the Assads. In recent days, he's allegedly been like meeting with imams that are not affiliated with HTS and Jawlani, and people are calling them Sufi imams. It's unclear exactly what that means, but that he's trying to build a separate power base, and that he did like a sort of a show of force somewhere around Daraa with some kind of like military parade or something like that. And so some people are saying this is a ticking time bomb. Obviously, that might just be to get more clicks and retweets. Other people are saying that that's misinformation, that he's coordinating with HTS. But I just thought I would mention it on Kalam Digest, so that if something does pop off, we can say that we have said it.
We knew it all along. But, well, I think I think that's very interesting. And let's be real. Of course, there will be at some point power struggles within the kind of this very fractured still opposition. Just to mention for the listeners who aren't aware of this, being a Sufi or call a Sufi imam in this context is of course kind of a slander from jihadist or Salafi groups. Being a Sufi is kind of the worst thing you could be while still be a Sunni Muslim, I guess.
Yeah.
But they might be actual Sufis, who knows? That's kind of a weird. In the West, I guess Sufis are just cute dancing people.
Yeah, it's a
Here is a symbol of like being not a Salafi. Basically.
Yeah, exactly. And being a Sufi in Syria and being a Sufi in Egypt might be different things. There are also like Sufi political leaders sort of that are not the same as being like a Sufi spiritual practitioner. And so
they do have kind of the lodge system, right? Same as in Turkey,
Yeah.
where they have some power centers of power in the southwest.
Exactly. So it's not necessarily like these are like progressives and the Salafi imams are conservative. It's not necessarily that. It's just different seats of power. Anyway, moving on to the regional question, Sam. Turkey is obviously very happy about this development. What do you think their role will be in a new Syria?
Yeah, they're obviously happy in the sense that they hated Assad or Erdogan did for a bunch of different reasons, but I would say that they're happy that he's gone, but they're also, I think, still navigating a very complex situation where they're not really sure what they're planning to do, I would say. So look, for example, at the HDS. Of course, they've been somewhat aligned with them, but they're not the main kind of Turkish representative group in in Syria. So for some people who think that this is kind of a long-standing Turkish conspiracy plot, something to bring down Assad, if that was the case, it would have been the SNA, the Syrian National Army, that would have led the opposition forces, which it was not. So I would say let's be careful with like assigning them too much control over the events in Syria right now. But so the central thing for the Turks, I would say, or sorry, not the Turks, but the Turkish government, would be to bring down, of course, the Kurdish self-rule in the northeast, under the control of the Syrian Democratic Forces, so-called the Kurdish militias. This is the sticking point for them. They are claiming this is, to them, it's kind of like Turkey under the Taliban for Bush or something. It's the global center of terrorism. I wouldn't agree with that, of course, and I don't think anyone on working on this podcast would agree with their assessment of the situation. But we have to understand that this is for Turkey. They consider this to be a life and death question as a government. So they kind of demand the dismantling in total of the Kurdish self-rule. What is going on the ground since then is their main ally, which is the SNA, the Syrian National Army, which is a part of the former Free Syrian Army, which was actually kind of an umbrella organization of most opposition groups back in the day, almost 10 years ago. This is not really an Islamist militia. It's more like an agglomeration of different opposition forces which have aligned themselves with Turkey 100%. So there have been ongoing fighting, serious fighting between them and the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is then the Kurdish, quote-unquote, forces. Last I saw was that the Kurdish forces were kind of retaking parts of Manbij, which is the main part of fighting, and which is close to the Turkish border. So the question then is, what is Turkey going to do with this? Will they try to invade northeastern Syria on their own? They might, if they're forced to do that, or quote-unquote forced, if they feel that they have to do that. But I would say they would be very much more inclined to find some kind of agreement led by the Damascus government, where Damascus and the Kurds would agree in some way to kind of reintegrate the Kurdish self-rule into Syria. For two reasons, I would say. One is however destructive the Turkish government's policy in the Middle East has been, I still think they understand that they would get a larger terrorism, quote-unquote, problem on their hands if they would disperse, more than 100,000 fighting militias and guerrillas from northeastern Syria. A kind of quote-unquote peaceful solution would be better for that. The other question, of course, which is complicating things, is that the U.S. has been very clear that they are not. We might see what happens with Trump next week, but so far the U.S. seems very clear that they're not going to give up on the Kurdish forces. They've been sending more military personnel and more advisors into the Kurdish self-rule areas, which, obviously is trying to signal to the Turkish government that they are not to kind of unilaterally take things into their own hands. This, of course, being two NATO countries. So this is an infighting area question inside NATO, which makes things even more complicated.
Yeah, which sort of brings us to the next point in this news digest. I think, unfortunately, we're entering into the Trump 2.0 era. In about 10 days, he'll be inaugurated, and we can't have a news podcast without mentioning his crazy antics and crazy statements, which he's been making about all kinds of places in the world. He's threatened military action against Denmark if he can't buy Greenland. Just an insane sentence to say.
Amazing. Yeah.
This is lovely. I love Mette Frederiksen, the Danish prime minister, had to go on Danish TV yesterday and said, I don't think the US will attack Sweden. He's thinking about her staff, Okay, we have to draft a statement on, do we think that the US will actually invade Greenland?
Yeah, and he's also talking about military action in the Panama Canal to retake that.
Yeah.
I can't assure you, you're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this, we need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military. I'm not going to commit to that now. It might be that you'll have to do something. Look, the Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China.
This is even before he's taken office. It's the 20th. I looked it up, by the way.
Yeah. Day before my birthday. Fantastic. And then he's also encouraging Canada to join the US.
Great idea, great plan.
Upon which the outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada said, "There's not a snowball's chance in hell that Canada join the
It's
US."
very Canadian.
Very Canadian. Ridiculous.
You know, Carl remarks.
Yeah.
This said like, I'm happy that someone's finally doing something about those artificial Sykes-Picot borders of the north of.
Yes. Well done. Awesome. But anyway, what Trump said that concerns us is that he said that he'll unleash all hell in Gaza. Which is a crazy statement considering that there's a genocide ongoing at the moment. But he said he'll unleash all hell in Gaza if the captives are not released. And he's obviously talking about the hostages that are still held by Hamas in Gaza, Israeli hostages that were taken on October 7th. The war in Gaza is still ongoing. The genocide in Gaza is still ongoing. And it's something that we should mention. Noura, you were looking into two directors, I think, of hospitals in Gaza who have been forcibly disappeared by it. And just before you get into it, I think the term forcibly disappeared applies here. I mean, when we're talking about Assad, Syria, there are a lot of people that have been forcibly disappeared as well in Sisi, Egypt. All over the Middle East, you have dictatorships that forcibly disappear people where you just don't know where they are. Israel does the same thing. We should use the same terminology, I believe.
Forcibly disappeared it is.
Yeah, take
What-
it away.
But so the entire, I don't even know where to start, to be honest, because this isn't something that started now late December, but that is what's gained a lot of traction when the last major health facility in northern Gaza, the Kamal Adwan Hospital, was completely raided and attacked, and it was also set on fire by Israeli forces with doctors and patients still inside. And several doctors were also taken into detention for interrogations. Among those was the director of the hospital, Hossam Abu Safiya. And there is a video sequence of him currently circulating social media, not verified if it is from the actual moment of his disappearance, but he is seen walking through a big road of rubble, basically, heading towards military tanks. And nobody has seen or heard from him since. The Israeli military have confirmed that they have detained him on very loose suspicions. So he's a suspect of potential involvement in terrorist activity, according to an IDF spokesperson. But to be honest, this isn't the first time this has happened. And I just read about it today that over a year ago, Dr. Ahmed Mohanna, the director of Al-Awda Hospital, also in northern Gaza, also was disappeared from one day to another. And still today, there are no signs of him. And it is exactly like you're saying, Edgar, that there is really this isn't a state that is a democratic state that would do this type of thing where they just forcibly disappear people. They just take them up and then there are no traces of them there are no trials, there are no ethical methods to actually prove if this person has done anything wrong. It is just on a very loose suspicion. And it does say itself that these are directors that have been very vocal about what is happening in the hospitals. So they have been to social media. For example, Dr. Hassam, he has been speaking quite a lot about what's happening at his hospital.
طبعا أنا الدكتور حسام أبو صفية مدير مستشفى كمال عدوان الواقع في شمال قطاع غزة. تم إبلاغنا من قبل الجيش بإخلاء المستشفى في خلال 24 ساعة قادمة، بإخلاء المستشفى من الكوادر الطبية وبإخلاء المستشفى من الأطفال المنومين ومن الجرحى والمصابين. وبالتالي أمامنا ساعات قليلة قادمة إذا لم يتم إخراج طبعا ما طلب منا أو ما يطلب منا من الاحتلال الإسرائيلي. أعتقد سنكون أمام مشهد شبيه بمشهد مستشفى الشفاء، وهذا ما قاله الجيش الإسرائيلي، أن مستشفى كمال عدوان سيكون كمستشفى الشفاء إذا لم يخرج كما طلب منا من الجيش الإسرائيلي.
I think it's, as you said, Edgar, forced disappearance is the correct term, but let's also remember even there is, of course, a number of, or Israel, as opposed to Assad, usually confirms that they have detained people, which is basically the only difference. I mean, there's, last time I checked, I think it was 700 people in detention by Israel, which is, you know, and that might sound like they're in there for 2 days, but it's, you know, people have been sitting there for years.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, and they're not even bringing any charges against them, as you mentioned, Noura. They're just keeping them indefinitely. So even if they might confirm, or they confirm that they have him, or even at some point, so far they've been denying him access to lawyers and to his family, etc. They're saying like, well, we have him, but no one's going to be allowed to meet him. Even if they do eventually allow that, that doesn't mean that they have, you know, that they will be bringing any charges against him, or that they will, on the other hand, release him. They might just keep him, you know, which is, as you said, I mean, it's there's nothing you can imagine a democratic, you know,
No.
No, of course.
anyway, democratic country doing.
Well, we are on the track of Gaza, and we mentioned the U.S. and Donald Trump. So there are some reports of a hostage release and a ceasefire, and there is like this very weak optimism. And the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has been saying that he is confident that there will be an agreement before Trump takes office on the 20th of January. This is, of course, something that we've heard before, and it is the deal that is now on the table is very loose, and it is basically the same deal that we saw in July, where it includes a first phase of exchanging prisoners. And according to several media outlets, Hamas has provided a list of 34 Israeli hostages that would be released, most of whom were captured on October 7th. And this is exactly the same list that was presented earlier in July. But to be honest, there is something about the obsession with the names on the list, because it has been published everywhere. I don't know if you guys have seen that. Every news outlet that has reported on this is also including the list in its entirety and every single name. And it's 34 names. But at the same time, just over the weekend, Israel killed over 100 Palestinians in Gaza, who remain unnamed, of course.
Yeah.
But somehow we're becoming obsessed with who these 34 people are, as if they are somehow more worthy.
Yeah, well,
And-
Israel keeps 9,000 Palestinians in prison, and for 2-3 of them, no one knows who they are, you know.
Exactly.
I mean, in the West, at least.
Yeah. But also I would say that optimism on ground to this ceasefire talk isn't all that great. I interviewed a young girl living in Al-Mawasi a couple of days ago before the New Year's. And she was talking about how this has been one of these instances where they keep on being told that there will be a ceasefire, and they become very hopeful and they become very happy about it. But then it is being retracted, and it is basically like dangling hope in front of their eyes, but then revoking it over and over again, and that she and people around her aren't really hoping for anything anymore. And also she said that if there will be no ceasefire agreement by January, then she doesn't actually believe that this year, that the war will end this year, which is incredibly a terrifying scenario, but also kind of realistic.
You know, these are certainly terrifying prospects. Really, really bleak outlook. But yeah, what can we do but hope for a ceasefire before Trump?
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Edgar Jenin, PA, West Bank.
Yes. So the last story, on the West Bank, there are obviously been clashes between the Palestinian Authority and various armed groups, some of them linked to Hamas and Islamic Jihad, but also secular armed groups, including Fatah, which we talked about on a different, on a previous Kalam Digest. And, you know, these clashes are ongoing. The crackdown is ongoing. The latest development that I saw that was that the PA, Palestinian Authority, has now requested $680 million from the U.S. in to bolster their security apparatus, which isn't a great look considering where the U.S. stands on Gaza, what the PA has been doing lately, banning Al Jazeera. And I'm going to get back to Al Jazeera. There's some nuances to that. But really, I mean, the big story was the killing of a female journalism student, Shaza Sabah, who was killed, shot in the head while she was walking home. I mean, the story is really eerily reminiscent of Shirina Abu Akleh, who famously was shot in the head by Israeli security forces while covering a raid into, I think, a Jenin refugee camp. And
Yes.
Shaza Sabah was a journalism student walking home in Jenin refugee camp, I believe, and was shot in the head by the PA. No one's been held to account, obviously. Al Jazeera reported on this, and now Al Jazeera is being banned. It's not a great look for the Palestinian Authority. I don't know how they could dig a hole deeper for themselves than they already are in terms of popular support, but what do you know? Al Jazeera, though, Khalil Sawyer is a guy I really respect, who I encourage everyone to follow on social media. Twitter is his sort of like outlet of choice. I've been in touch with him. He's definitely going to be on the show. He's a Christian from Gaza whose younger sister was killed during the war. He was out of the country when the war began, I believe. He's really a strong voice of reason, a harsh critic of Hamas, and also a harsh critic, obviously, of Israel and their genocidal war in Gaza. But he gave some nuance when it comes to Al Jazeera and specifically Al Jazeera Arabic, because that's always the sort of troublemaker when it comes to their reporting. And when it comes to Al Jazeera Arabic, there are examples of them sort of inciting inter-Palestinian conflict in the West Bank, where they published a fake claim that a 12-year-old Palestinian girl had carried out a stabbing attack against Israelis, and that the Palestinian Authority had arrested her and handed her over to Israeli forces. But that's not exactly the story. Obviously, if you publish something like that, that encourages people to go out on the streets and if not just protest, but attack Palestinian Authority forces. But what had actually happened was that her father had handed her over to Israeli authorities to avoid her being treated as a terrorist, because that's what Israel does to anyone wielding a knife, no matter if that's a 12-year-old girl or not. So it wasn't exactly what had happened. So obviously, Khalil and I agree that Al Jazeera should not be banned. That's a crazy authoritarian decision. But Al Jazeera, specifically Al Jazeera Arabic, aren't like completely innocent. I mean, they do a lot of reckless reporting, and they're very hard when it comes to reporting on the Palestinian issue, not just when it comes to Israel-Palestine, but inter-Palestine conflicts. And Qatar have their own agenda here. Obviously, Al Jazeera is funded by Qatar, and Qatar are aligned with Hamas, not with the Palestinian Authority. So there are some things there. But other than that, on the West Bank, things are sort of just very depressed. The economy is awful. It's worse than it was when I was there last summer. And the question is how long this war can go on, because it's affecting all parts of Palestine and Israel. Yeah, Sam.
Yeah, I just to point that out with Al Jazeera, I think you're totally right. Al Jazeera Arabic has been actively reporting in ways that would benefit Qatar, whilst you should be skeptical of all reporting from all sources. But I think Al Jazeera English is usually. I mean, I'm doing this whole period. I mean, you might discuss or question their what they focus on, but I would say that they are very, very high. The standards of journalism is very high. I mean, higher than in most Western serious media outlets.
Yeah.
You mentioned that with the West Bank political situation. I think this is as you said, could they do anything to make themselves less popular with the ordinary people in the West Bank? And we have to, remember this. Abbas is not in any possible way anymore an elected or democratically elected president. He's overstayed his term by 10 years by now or something like that.
At least.
Yeah, it's insane. Also, and you do have some questionable but usually somewhat accurate opinion polling coming out of the West Bank and Gaza, which we've been talking about on this podcast before. And according to the last such poll I saw, I think the popular support for Abbas and the current government of the PA, the Palestinian Authority, was somewhere around 7%. That is nowhere near, that's far below what Fatah or the secular forces in Palestine would poll as political movements. This is something else. People are really, really tired of them, and they have no respect for them, and they're kind of collusion with Israel. I just saw yesterday, I think, on social media, Dima Sarsour, very much a friend of the pod, writing about how she thinks it's very possible or even probable that we will have a third intifada in the West Bank in the coming months if the PA doesn't somehow step down, because there's already been clashes, of course, ongoing for a long time between Israeli forces and the resistance in the West Bank. But if the PA sides all out with Israel, and the economy keeps getting worse, and there's nothing to hold people back anymore, which might not end well, let's just say. But anyway, it's a very, very tense situation and people are very upset for good reasons.
Yeah, of course. We'll be sure to follow these developments in coming Kalam Digest installments. But for now, thank you so much for listening, everyone. We're logging off. We're signing out. Edgar Mannheimer, Samuel Kal Samra, Noradin Fares. Thank you for joining me today, guys.
Thank you. Bye.